you very much. Yeah, so we've, I think we beat the community of practice to death. There were lots of areas that we went through, and I've sort of gone one level further now in terms of building a data team. And one of the things that struck me was when I was talking to some of our clients in terms of helping them build these data teams. I went on to Google, and just about the only time I could see data teams were in reference to data engineering teams. And there's a guy called Jesse Anderson, I believe, and he dominates just about everything on Google. He's done a fantastic job. And it's all about moving data at speed and how do you prepare these teams. That's one aspect to it. I've taken a slightly different approach to it, one where we start, and I refer to it as knowledge driven. So there's a slight difference. So the areas that we'll be talking about today, the first one is, what do I mean by knowledge driven? So please note, this is a Howard Diesel thing. I don't think you'll be able to find a definition on Google to say what I'm presenting today. We'll then go and look at why do we need data teams? What's important about the structuring of these data teams? And then how do we build and organize a data team? And I do believe that there are going to be multiple. So certainly the CDO will be in charge of all the data teams, but we will have to create these data teams depending on certain characteristics, and that's the area that I'd like to go through. And then right at the end, I just wanted to come back to a simple definition of so what is a data team? How do we apply it to our organizations? How does it work? All right, so I've got two or three colleagues with me. I've got Veronica, I've got Christine, and Costa. And you'll see we'll be getting into ethics and culture and change and stuff like that in terms of building these teams, because as we saw in the community of practice, that is not just about the processes and the definitions and the guidelines. There are all sorts of elements that we need to take care of. Okay, so now today we had some really interesting challenges with both Costa, who specializes in data ethics, and we're hoping that we're going to get him on one of our talks soon to talk about data ethics. He was with Damon Norway in their talk earlier this month. And so this area is growing tremendously, and I think there's lots that we have to learn. So looking forward to that. Between ethics, culture, and change, there's so much that we have to learn, and it's sort of an area where I start to go quiet because I'm not too aware of those conditions. So anyway, let's move on. So again, I think I may have shared this with you last week or last time. Before I start preparing on a topic and an area that I always like to see what Google has to say about it, so there's a lot of what I'm doing today sort of follows them. What is the structure? What is the charter? What are the responsibilities? And then what are the roles? So hopefully we can answer those questions for you today. If I don't, please give me a shout. Ask questions, and as many as you like. Especially with Christine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just quickly, there's a comment from Genevieve just to position it as an upfront question to see if we get it answered, and we can attend to it at the end if we don't. But right. Basically, I'd love to know if you have used
biomimicry
to inform the structure and systems within data teams. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like the question you brought in here. I haven't. But we are talking to someone who's dealing with and looking at what's called the digital twin, and building a digital twin in that. It's not biomimicry, but it's almost a simulation of how the teams are performing. So Genevieve, not there yet, but I do know is Esty on board. She's with the SAIIE, which is the Industrial Engineering. they're looking at quite a bit of this biomimicry, and it may be helpful. I'll actually talk to her and see if she can contribute. Genevieve, does that sort of answer your question?
No, that's yeah, it would be very interesting for me to hear what she has to say around I'm particularly passionate about using it.
Have you started looking at something called the digital twin?
No, so I'm definitely going to have a look at that.
Yeah, the digital twin, so they're applying that, things like any reference material like the DM book. How do we make a digital twin of that, and how do we bring it into the organization and then start using the organization characteristics to configure a sort of lookalike? And one of the areas that's been applied is called the DM book. So because the DM book has got all these practices and that, how would we set those practices up and simulate those practices within our organization, depending on our talents?
Cool. So that's already, taking a look deeper at how things are working and starting to look at the values.
And that's really nice. Yeah, and that's really nice from a point of view of when you customize those processes, because typically they deal with the why and the what, and not so much the how. And you've got to bring it down to the how to get the digital twin or the mimicry going as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, fantastic. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to just introduce what I refer to as knowledge-driven. And I'm sure you've seen, there was some interesting posts by the Harvard Business Review. Anyone see that on why people are battling to achieve data-driven? So there was a nice article there, helpful to go and read it. And then there's also this idea of decision-driven. And if we look at the characteristics of data-driven, we can see here that the anchor is on data, and then it's about finding the purpose in data, start from what we know in the data. So that's all of our data that's coming from our business processes and some of the data that we're getting from external areas. And then it's almost giving this data to the data scientist and say, what can you find? Now, I do believe there's value in that in terms of picking up the patterns, but I am also seeing lots of danger in that, where we start to find things that we shouldn't find, and we start to react in ways that we shouldn't be reacting. Okay, so I always like to ask the question, when we're looking at data and when we're looking for insights, why are you looking for those insights? What is the use case before we just look for insights? So helpful to have those questions. Now, if I look at decision-driven, and I feel that it's getting closer to what I think we should be, and you'll see a lot of my work today is about decisions. So we anchor on a decision to be made, and then we find data for a purpose, and starting from what is unknown, we go and try to complement that, and the idea is to empower decision makers. Okay, I'll put the Harvard Business Review article there for you. Okay, great. Yeah, so that was a good challenge there. So data driven. Now, so I'm saying be cautious with this one. It can lead you down a path that you may not want to go. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see what's the state of available information. It's almost what you've got, the known knowns. So that's the easy place to start. This one is harder, and it starts from the unknown area. So it's these quadrants here where we known, unknown, unknown, known, and unknown, unknown. And so sometimes we battle with that area to get going because we don't always have the data. And what I'm suggesting is that we need to bring both of these together, and what I refer to as knowledge driven, and we're trying to deal with all of these areas, all of these different areas together. So that's the area that I position knowledge driven, but I must admit that a lot of my talk is about decision making. And how does the decision guide us? But we can certainly go to the existing data and look for answers and look at what we need to do. Okay, so I don't think it's an or. Lots of people are presenting it as an or. Do we go data-driven or decision-driven? I think we have to go both, because it's almost that sort of bottom-up, which is from the data we have, and the top-down is from the decisions. Okay, so I think we've all had enough experience to know that it's not one way or only one approach. We'll typically use both to get a better understanding of what's going on. All right. Okay, so these are the areas that we want to talk about today. What are the benefits of having a data team? What is the organizational structure? And then the area on summary. So what is a world-class data team look like? This section over here, the fourth section, is almost my summary of big data to make big data understandable. If you'd like me to go into that section, I will towards the end if we've got some time. Otherwise, it's more of a reference material, and when you guys get the slides, you'll be able to go through that section over there. Okay, so it deals with things like the transformation of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. What are the appropriate business questions, and what is the data sophistication, which we've been through quite often. All right, so let's start off in terms of the benefits. But before I go on, are there any questions? Is there anything that, I like the one from Genevieve, the question up front. Anything that you'd like to know or understand about being knowledge-driven? You will find in the slide at the end, and I'll jump there quickly, we refer to this area as cognitive analytics, and it requires aspects of the ontologies, and that's sort of the area that I'm positioning some of the knowledge-driven work that we do in. Okay, so that was, I didn't want to go through that whole loop, and I seem to be doing that at the moment. Okay. All right, so if there are any questions there in terms of that, I'll go on to the benefits, the team benefits. So one of the big benefits of having a knowledge-driven data team is that we really start to focus on our decisions. Okay, I believe the making decisions is a lot more sophisticated when we apply knowledge-driven data teams. So I don't know about you guys, but I go into so many customers and I ask them for a database of the decisions that they need to make, right up from the top to the bottom. And most of the times I get the answer of we don't know or we don't have one. So is there anybody that does have a decision inventory, that have applied a decision audit? Is there anyone here that's done it? No. Okay. All right. So you're probably in a similar situation to me, is I haven't really found a lot of people that are focusing on building a decision inventory or decision database, or have even conducted a decision audit. Okay. And then we have products, the development of data products. The other benefits is effectiveness and efficiency, and then truth before meaning. So let's go through that. So the first one that we want to focus on is our decision sophistication. And this is a slide that I prepare in terms of working and helping people understand the decision life cycle. So I've done something very similar to that of the DMBOK, but just for decision making. So how do we plan our decisions? How do we measure the decisions that we make? And how do we decide and act on the decisions? And with that, you also have to do decision risk management and decision quality management. Any of you guys read the book on decision quality? No? Okay, so you thought you were in the depths of despair when you're looking at data quality. And what I really like is this book on decision quality that actually lifts us up into an organizational level and helps people ensure that they get good decisions made. And I think we sometimes focus so much on the data and we leave a lot of our executives behind, we leave a lot of the people behind because we're not talking the language that they understand, is how to make decisions and what decisions that we need to make. And I agree with you, Mark. I think we've all made some really poor decisions. And so sometimes we're a little bit worried about measuring our decisions. And I think it's actually quite something that I've found is in lots of the warehouses I've been through, with the one company, we tried to harvest all the decisions. So we said, this is fantastic. We've got a BI system. Now, what decisions are we making based on the BI reports, and can we record them? It started off very well, and then people stopped adding the decisions or stopped telling us what decisions they were making based on the BI report. So the nice thing about it was that it got us to look at every single report that we prepared on our data warehouse, and we said, what decision is this thing going to answer? That was quite a really helpful approach that we got. So as part of decision making, there's quite a long journey that we need to go through. I look at 3 areas of our journey on decision making: value sophistication, measurement, and decision making. Now, a lot of it's based on trust. So it's if you don't have any trust in the data, you're constantly going to sit in this area where there's strong disagreement and agreement, and then you're going to battle to move forward. So it's all about getting to a higher level of, yes, we can't say there's going to be no disagreement. That's a bit foolish. But we want to be able to get to that agreement quicker, to be able to make the decisions more effectively. Okay, so if the data team is there to support decision making, the benefit is that we improve our decision sophistication within the organization, because that's where we're paying attention. All right. Now, data products, I really enjoy this thing of digital transformation, but what I'm not seeing in a lot of people's attempts to do the digital transformation is a lot of the times it's paying attention to the technology. It's having to be able to work remotely, not having physical documentation around. And I get that. That's important. That's part of uplifting our maturity. But what I find very rarely is this idea of looking at our key decisions and then what questions can we predict from looking at the questions, and then what data are we going to support? So notice how with this approach, we are dealing with the data and the questions before we're getting to architecture and technology. Okay, so simply put, what are the questions and decisions that we need to answer from a business? What is the data that we're going to need to support the answering of that? And then we can go and look for architecture and technology. A lot of the other times it's all about architecture and technology, and then what data do we get out of this? And then how do we build the BI systems from that? So I've always found it back to front. I don't know if there's anyone who disagrees with me. I'd love to hear your views on it, but I keep on trying to say, let's understand what the decisions are and what data is required, and then we can go looking for our architectures, and I'll show you a little bit more in terms of what I mean by that. Jan, I'm glad to see you agree. So when we build the data products, our whole driver around the data product, if you're not monetizing the data product, and even sometimes when you are, it's what answers and insights are required for decision making. When we understand that, we can build the data product around the business decision making. What are the decisions? And without an inventory, we're pretty stuck and we're pretty messed up. Okay. Efficiency and effectiveness, I think from a data team point of view, we have to get this right. We keep on talking about 80% of the time what the data scientists are spending on wrangling. And I keep looking at this and saying, well, if you're spending so much time on data wrangling, where are your data engineers? What's happened to them? Okay. Why are you doing so much of this wrangling? And I put the data lifecycle up here in terms of trying to bring this discussion to the front is where a lot of the times when I see a data value lifecycle, it starts with create and obtain, and then store, use, and enhance. So these plan and design and enable are not there. I mean, I've always found this interesting when people describe a data value chain, and the very first step on the value chain is creating the data. Surely we should be planning some of this before we start. And the planning means, why do I need this data? I have shared this, this measurement with you guys before called data sufficiency. Anyone know about data sufficiency? Anyone heard about data sufficiency? Oh, sure. So data
just enough data to make a decision.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. It's about what data do I need to make a decision, and then what it does do is it helps data governance people control the data that's coming into the organization. So if I've got a decision inventory of the decisions I make, and I've got certain decisions that I know and I've got data to answer it, please don't bring in the same data from somewhere else. I've got the data, I can answer those decisions. And so data sufficiency is a way for data governance to be able to say, why are you bringing the data in? What decisions are you going to answer? Okay. So the other aspect is, we're spending 80% because we got the wrong people on the bus, as we spoke about, and they're not in the right seats and they're not doing the things at the right time. So we've got to get around this thing of data scientists spending so much time wrangling and munging the data. We got to find ways of doing that and overcoming that. But I've spoken about that quite often. And part of that is getting the right planning done, the right engineering, and reducing and almost increasing the speed at which we get to these green areas, which is use and enhance. That's the only time that business get value, in the use and enhance. All of the other areas are cost to the business. So we've got to reduce our time spent engineering, and we've got to increase the time spent getting the insights. So let's not just get any data, all data. Let's look at the data that's important. All right. Okay. So yeah, Jan, you're right. The question about getting the alignment among key stakeholders regarding modeling and architecture principles, I agree with you, but I also feel for them. And I also understand that we've done so much, a lot of the times we've done so much work in architecture and modeling, and are they paying the benefits? Are we getting benefits from them? And I do believe sometimes, for example, when we build enterprise data warehouses, why are we building them? Are we driven to answer decisions? So we've got some challenges there as well. Okay. So the next thing is truth before meaning. I'm sure you guys have seen quite a lot of what Scott Taylor's been saying. He keeps banging on the drum in terms of the data scientists constantly saying, well, we searching after meaning, and until we get meaning, the data is useless. We can't do anything with it. And I think we are saying, yes, you're right. It does give meaning. It does give the ability to interpret what the business are saying in terms of the decision. But if we don't pay attention to the data and making and ensuring that it's truthful, we get meanings that are very interesting that we've developed. Okay, so we have to get the foundations right. We have to get the truth out. If the data is not telling the truth, well, please don't go and look for meaning if we don't even have any truth in the data. So foundational management curates the truth prior to searching for meaning. All right. So helpful, we talk about curation, we talk about all of those things from a data governance point of view. If the data is not giving us truth and it's not telling us something about the decisions we need to make, probably a good idea not to have the data. Okay, so that's what I see in terms of almost the benefits of the data, and they're pretty quantifiable. This was the easy side of the discussion, in terms of that's the value that your data teams have to provide the business. answer all the questions, and improve the decision-making capability of the organization. Now, it's interesting when I look through the DMBOK, one of the first principles there are there about that we have all the data management is to support decision-making. Now, I know if someone like Mark and myself, when we started with all this work, they used to call BI, they used to call it decision support. It's no longer called decision support. I don't know why. Probably one of the most important things that we need to do is support business decision making, but we now call it business intelligence. And now we're going to look for everything, all meaning, anything we scratch wherever it needs to be scratched. And whether we get it right or not is a different story. Okay. Let's go to organization and structure. So where do we start with the data teams? Okay, so it's pretty simple. We have to start at the top. If you start at the bottom, I'll show you some of the consequences. We can get all sorts of data in. We don't know what decision needs to answer, and we typically align ourselves in the wrong direction. And then what is the operating model that's required to support decision-making model? And then how do we qualify our decisions? And this decision qualification, if you're not aware of that qualification process, we tend to not understand the appropriate team structure and culture for the data team that's required. Okay. All right, so knowledge driven, where do we start? We start with the data executive. Okay, we start with the CDO. We got to get the CDO right. And I always like this T structure or the T-shaped skills. And if we look right on top, probably the most important aspect of the CDO is and I'll just highlight that because I'm sure you can't see it. This is the area here. We're talking about understanding business drivers, change management and leadership, and collaboration. So that's one of the front-facing aspects of a CDO's job, is to get the business drivers and to ensure that we can bring about change management and leadership, bring in the right data teams, and then the collaboration and how do we get these teams to work together. All right. So that's the role that the CDO has to play for us. And they set the tone in terms of what our teams look like. And then the next thing is getting a decision audit going. All right. And I see a decision audit as two phases, one being a decision inventory. And let me just put a focus on that. This is what we're talking about. The decision inventory. These are the decision-making elements. So if you need to ever build and go through a decision inventory, we need to look at what decisions are we looking at: strategic, tactical, and operational. And there's another type of decision making that I brought in, which is called intrinsic decision making. That's decision making on the fly, gut feeling decisions. We mustn't think that those decisions don't exist, and we should take an inventory of what they are and why are we doing it. And I'll give you some cases where I think it's helpful to have that. Who is making the decision? Is it an individual, or do we have collective people that need to make the decision? And I think you all are aware of the fact that if it's collective, especially across multiple business units and a federated thing, then the decisions take a lot longer to come about. If it's individual within one of the business department, it's a lot easier. When are the decisions being made? Are they proactive or are they reactive? Do we provoke decisions? And then how are the decisions made? Are they based on information? What data are they based on? Or are they intuitive? This is what my gut feeling's telling me. Now, I brought in this other area, which I refer to as decision qualification. Anyone aware of Cynefin? The Cynefin framework, and it's actually referred to as the uncertainty framework. Okay, and the Cynefin framework is really nice in terms of it positions our decisions in these different quadrants, and we can take a different approach to the decision making. Okay, not all technology, there is no one technology that can deal with all decision making. And I'm sure you guys have heard of some of the discussions we had last week or the week before on digital decisioning. Anyone remember that? Paul, do you remember it? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Now, digital decisioning is a fancy word for RPA, or robotic process automation, right? So what we're saying is there are certain decisions that can be made by machines. They don't need people to make the decisions. Now, all of us say that's fantastic. I hope we all say that. That's really nice. But don't we have to be careful in certain situations? And the answer is yes, you better believe it. And we need to be able to partition certain decisions and understand the characteristics of the decisions that digital decision is appropriate for. And we'll show you how to do that. Okay. All right, so this is the book I've been referring to. It talks about decision quality. They talk about 10 key questions, and I like to just go through them quickly in terms of, is our leadership cohesive and aligned? So when we talk about the decision quality, we've got to look at the leadership team. That's why I'm saying if you don't get your CDO as part of this thing, you're going to start battling. We've spoken about individual roles. What is the organizational structure? So it's important there. Do we have enough high-performing people there to be able to make it? How do we measure it? And then we talk about what is the high-performance culture, and do we have the capacity to change? Now, there's only one thing missing on this, and that's why I've added the 10+1, and that's where we're getting into nowadays with AI, and that's where I refer to as decision-making ethics. All right, so we can't just, in all cases, allow machines to make a decision and allow us to make decisions that we don't, and we are unaware of why and what led to that decision and how did they get there. So I'm sure you guys are aware of, in GDPR, they've got this right to explanation. So if a machine makes a decision, the person who's on the receiving end of that decision has the right to explanation. So they should be able to go to the organization and say, please explain how you got to this answer. Okay, so we all know that at this stage, with the technology where it's at, being able to explain that is not very easy, how the decision got there. All right, so before going into those details, I wanted to just share with you some understanding of these decision audit layers: strategic, tactical, operational, and instinctive. The strategic are our big choices, and they typically fit into a very complex environment. The impact is high. The cause and effect, we don't have any answers. We're still building the strategy. We're plotting a new journey, and we're dealing with data that's unknown. Okay, now the right form of analytics to understand strategy and make strategic is explorative, right? So we're not talking about predictive analytics here, or what people refer to as confirmatory. We're not trying to confirm our ideas. We're trying to explore the options. Okay, so when you deal with strategic decisions, they're typically using explorative analytics, hypotheticals. What happens if we do this? If we go this direction, what's the answer going to be? Then we've got the tactical layer, we've got operational layer. The cause and effect is well known. The impact is medium to low, so we don't have to stress too much about it. And we're typically dealing with known and unknown, and in this area we can bring in the digital decisioning. Okay. All right, so the operating model, in terms of the decision making, how do we get affected? Now, the very first thing that affects our operating model and our decision making is what I refer to as a value discipline. Okay. Now, the value discipline is represented here on the top right. We have product leadership, those that are trying to build the best product. That was IBM in the past. We've got the Googles, we've got the Facebook, we've got all these areas where they are driving the product as far as they can, and it's all about the best product, and it's differentiating themselves on product features. And then on the other side, we've got customer intimacy, which is where IBM is currently fitting into. And this is the best solution for the customer. Now, you may ask, what has this got to do with decision making? Well, interestingly enough, when you have a customer intimacy discipline, you are pushing your decisions to the front line. So if you're trying to support customer intimacy, the customers are asking questions, and based on their requirements, you are making a decision. What is good for the customer? So you can't centralize decision-making at a high level at the execs that may not have, I shouldn't say haven't, but they may not have spoken to a customer for a long time. So typically where your decision-making is happening at marketing and sales, all right, it's the front line. Your customer support teams, how they are the people that are going to be making the decision. Now, when you get into operational excellence and you refer to best total cost, the decision making about what's the right product, what's the right customer, what's the right price, that's not done in front of the customer. That's basically done to achieve the throughput and the number of inventory turns, right? So there's no question to the customer, would you like this? Would you like that? No. This is what we get. These are the products that we get at the cheapest value, and we make the most money when we get more inventory turns out of that. So that's decision making made right at the top level, and everyone adheres to it. You can't have different people making different decisions about what's right and what's wrong. Okay, so we can see as we choose different value disciplines, and as we have more decisions made by different departments, the decision making and therefore the data teams need to move with the decisions. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say is, depending on your decision mandates, depending on how you're setting up your decisions, you may find that you either got a centralized set of data teams or you've got decentralized or a federated set of data teams. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So don't just build the data teams and say, okay, now we're going to support the whole organization when you haven't understood what your mandates are and your decision structures are. It's very similar to building a data governance organizational structure and not worrying about where the decisions are being made. All right. So let's then look at the team structure. And this is that Cynefin diagram that I was showing you. You can see there's 4 quadrants. We talk about the area of known, and this is what Cynefin refers to as obvious, and it's more about it's the cause and effect. The cause and effect is obvious, meaning, just to give you very simplistic examples, if I only earn 1,000 Rand a month, I cannot give you a loan for 200,000 that you're going to repay in 5 years. Okay, the cause and effect is well understood. All right, there's not a lot of debate that's required at that level. When we go into the next level, which we refer to as complicated, we now require experts to help us answer the question. And so we're using what people refer to as confirmatory analytics, or another word for that is predictive analytics. And we come up with a prediction to say this is what's going to happen. We'll then consult with certain experts, be they in the business, your SMEs, or be they external, to say, does this make sense to you? Is it sort of in line with where you're going? Can you give us feedback on that? If the answer is yes, that looks right, then we say, fantastic, these algorithms are working. This approach to our decision making is working. And then we have a complex environment where there are no right answers, okay? And this is very much we take a very much of a collaboration or a democratic leadership approach to this team. There's no one person that must dominate. And I think I shared this with you some time back, where NASA had a problem of reintroducing one of the shuttles back into orbit, back into the atmosphere. Something went wrong. And they had to have a team, because no one had experienced this before. They had to build a team of all sorts of people, and they had to try find a way of fixing the problem before it re-entered the atmosphere. So there are no experts to go and consult. No one's experienced this situation before. 9/11 was another one, okay, where these things haven't happened before, and you now need to find a way of getting through that. So you use a very collaborative or democratic approach. And then we get into chaos, where this is pandemic, this is different aspects of 9/11, where you've just got to make a decree and then follow the decree until you can answer it and come up with a better answer or a better way of approach. So you can see the different authorities that the different managers must have, or the leaderships. So I hope the point's coming across that dependent on the decision and where it's being qualified. So can you see in this top right-hand corner, I've got two decisions that are sitting in the complex area. I've got 4 decisions sitting in the complicated. I've got 1 decision sitting in obvious or simple, and I've got 4 decisions sitting in chaos. I'd really not like to be in an organization where I have 4 of my top decisions sitting in a chaos area, but this is possible. So this is how we qualify. So we use these things to help us choose the team, choose the methods of approach, choose the technologies that are applicable. In terms of sentiment analysis or analytics, the type of analytics, don't just look for a technology and believe it's going to answer all your decisions. Guys, it doesn't work like that, and you go and you get quite depressed when you think that you buy all this technology and it's not going to work, or you invest in training people and they're not answering all the questions that the business needs. All right, so this is sort of the framework that we have when we look at knowledge-driven business decisions. I'm not going to go through this all. You guys can look at it and we can have a discussion offline. But we frame our decisions, the context, we understand the cause and effect, we look at the state of knowledge, we understand the type of analysis that we need to apply, we look at the decision quality from a business, we look at the talent, we look at the methods, and you can see here a list of methods: lean, drum buffer, rope, that's your theory of constraints. We look at Six Sigma, we look at critical chain, and you can see how the methods can be applied in the different areas, right, across those different quadrants. But that's a discussion for someone else. Now, this is the harder one, and I've sort of brought on, and I'm hoping for some support from Veronica and co, where what we're trying to do is, depending on the framework that you are in, different thinking styles are preferable. Okay, so please don't jump to the conclusion that I'm saying that if we're in a chaos, we can't have other thinking styles, but we're talking about a dominant thinking style. And we did, I think it was on Monday or the week before, where we showed people on the different types of thinking styles. We got your concrete sequential, abstract sequential, concrete random, and abstract random. And what we're trying to suggest is that these certain thinking styles work better in these domains, better for these decisions. All right, so let's go through a simple example, and excuse the use of the word simple for this quadrant. We are saying that people that are concrete sequential are some of the best thinking styles for this area. And they like the logical sequence. They like everything in order. They like to have the knowns, the getting the facts. Okay, so concrete sequential thinking styles is the dominant thinking style for this area. Now, that's not always the case when you go into chaos, where you've got a lot of randomness. There is no order in chaos. Well, some people argue, and I've certainly seen books written about the order in chaos, and yes, it's there, but We need a lot more random and abstract, random thinking within that. Okay. Now, we also we believe that the concrete random people are better at the chaos area because they put in a decree and they start following the steps. Okay. So you will do 1, 2, 3, 4, and hopefully we'll get to the end. If not, we'll adjust and then we'll go and do 4, 5, 6, whatever that is. So that's the type of thinking that's more appropriate in the chaos area. And then we've got abstract sequential. This is more your academic, your experts. They give you confirmation and they give you predictions in terms of how this works. And then we've got our abstract random that we believe are more appropriate in the complex. Now, when you're building a team, we're not saying that you've got to have all the same thinking style in the team. Please, guys, that's not what I'm trying to say. But what we are saying is that your leaders and your thought leaders within those teams, within those data teams, that's the type of thinking style that's preferable. Are there any comments or questions around that? Everyone? Sure. I know we've really just put some observations down here. We think that there's a lot more work and testing that needs to come along before you can do that. But I suppose the message that we're trying to say is understand the characteristics of the decisions and where they're sitting, and then look for the right talents. Don't just bring in the same set of talents across the place all the time. Now, we've done the same thing with culture. Christine, I wonder if you can share a little bit. This is a lot of your thinking that's come along. Would you like to share on this slide?
Yes, thank you, Howard. Good afternoon, everybody. So culture, we've used the 11 model with the 4 types of culture, just as the standard baseline, and we've applied it to the Cynefin quadrants. And it works quite well. What is quite interesting is on the Cynefin, if you look at the simple and the chaos, they both kind of work well, or the preferred kind of culture would be one of control. So although you would think they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum, the one is on the simple Cynefin, the control element there is more automated and clear. But the chaos side, it's a lot more dynamic. So it's just an interesting one. The other interesting thing for me is when we applied the culture to the complicated zone, it becomes relevant to be very competent at what you're doing. So, expertise, craftsmanship, be able to strategically plan, and really know what the organization holds becomes important. So complicated would be better suited for competence. And then, of course, your complex environment, from a culture perspective, the team would do well by having a lot of collaboration and cultivation. So, be able to synergize, brainstorm, engage, as well as having diverse groups that are able to share different perspectives. They would need to be a lot more dynamic as a team, and there'd be a need for more creativity and self-expression. So more consultative and engaging in their manner. Again, just to emphasize what you've said earlier about the thinking styles, the culture, it's not saying that you only need control in the simple quadrant of the Cynefin. It's saying that you probably need a little bit of everything, but the preferred and the best one in that, the best team makeup in that particular quadrant would be control for simple. I just want to, the ideal, in my mind, whether it's a team or an organization, the ideal culture for me would be, we would all aspire to be as agile as possible. And that's another whole conversation for another time. But we would want an organization to be agile because the team might be in a quadrant of chaos, stabilize, and then become simple or complicated. And if they're agile, they would be able to then apply the different nuances that situation requires. So we're not saying that this is an absolute formula, and we are saying that agile is the way to go for an organization across the board, enterprise-wide. But it's a very interesting exercise because it brings home the reality and, for me, the value of the Cynefin from a decision-making to kind of analyze the decision quadrants and really know what is the best tactical approach for a team or what is the best ingredient of a team.
Mm. Thanks, Christine. That was great, and I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions, and I'd like to hold them off to the end because I think these are probably the most challenging areas: this talent, the thinking styles, the culture, and the next one, which is I'd like Costa to talk to, which is the ethics. So what we're trying to do here, guys, is we're trying to say, if an ethicist, and we're wanting that to happen, if an ethicist is going to be involved in the data team, right? So even if you look at Jesse Anderson, they all talk about it, multidisciplinary teams. The data team is a multidisciplinary team, and we also believe in the ethics by design. So when we have these data teams helping us look at the decisions and make the decisions, how would the ethicist, what sort of ethics would they apply in these different areas depending on the quadrant that we're in? Costa, if you would like to talk through that.
Give me a sec.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. So we have, so let's start with simple, which is virtue ethics. And here we can see it's really clear cut. There are universal values. We kind of know what's right and wrong. We have a clear idea of what's right and wrong. And, you know, the idea of causing no harm and the idea of beneficence. It's really appealing to our conscience. We're looking at things like, you know, high level virtue, or in the ranking of virtues, we would be looking at things like honesty and integrity. Character, essentially person's good character. So that would fall in the simple, the sort of simple, quite the dominant style there. Would be looking at that. I mean, in the ranking of ethics, of virtue ethics, really politeness is the lowest form of the virtues. But right, you know, rank them and look at honesty and integrity. So that's pretty much straightforward. We all know we have universal values of what's right and wrong, and that's pretty much simple to look at and understand. Where it gets more,
if I could just interrupt there. We keep on saying that digital decisioning is this area. This is the great area for digital decisioning. That's machine learning, and I think your point on beneficence is important here. Is when we start allowing the machines to make a decision, we have to ensure that we're not causing any damage.
Yes, agree. It's cause no harm. So beneficence is a very important principle. You know, in terms of not causing, making sure we don't harm people, don't harm individuals.
Yeah.
Complicated. So here, let's look at this. This is more sort of duty based from deontology, and the example that we've sort of come up here with the duty of care. So with autonomous vehicles, you have this dilemma now. What happens in a decision has to be made. The vehicle is designed to protect the passengers and the driver, but also what happens when you have a pedestrian or a cyclist. You know, all these vehicles have this technology like Volvo, Mercedes, and so on. And you have to decide here, there's a duty here. You have a duty to the passenger and to the driver, but also there's a responsibility on pedestrians and cyclists. So here it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of what happens in a situation like this. The complex, here we talk about complex human judgments. and a humanistic judgment. So if you look at a weighting between, we have to save the planet, but we also have to save human beings. But if we had artificial intelligence making the decision, and we had to decide, well, to save the planet, actually, we need to, human beings are part of the problem, then we have to bring the human being back into the equation. So here it's more of a consultative, we need some collaboration and consultation. Both are important, of course. The planet, Earth, and people are important. They're in a symbiotic relationship, but it's a judgment you have to take, a human judgment, and bring the human being back into the equation here. Then chaos, I think chaos is pretty straightforward. Howard spoke about chaos, and he used the example of 9/11 and the pandemic. And this is obviously by decree, where you want to take control. And here it's a utilitarian really example, because here, what is your ultimate goal here? Your immediate priority is to save lives. So here it's more about the individual taking charge, taking control, and making a decision to save lives. There's no data available, and that's the immediate concern here, is to take control. And that's really where the chaos, the dominant style here, decision style, would be utilitarian, save lives right now.
Yep, I like that one. And there's always that thing with the pandemics. We always have this debate of lives versus livelihood. So we're going to cause a problem when we stop everybody from working or going anywhere. But our major goal is to save lives. Livelihoods are secondary. So we have to make the decision. Now, and the reason I really enjoyed this, looking at the ethics side of it, is when we build these data teams and it's all about making decisions, who's helping us with this interpretation of the consequence of the decision and the approach that we're taking. So if we're going to introduce ethics by design, we better have these people that are available to us to help us talk through it, understand what's important in this area. So it's not and sometimes we get confused about, but what about these people and that people? No, we got to get this steer right from the front. Costa, thanks very much for that.
Sorry, I just want to add, like Christine mentioned when she was discussing culture, also, I mean, duty, for instance, if we take duty also comes in. We were talking about the dominant decision. Yes. But obviously, things like duty can cut into all of them. There's a duty of care in the utility of saving lives. There's a duty to planet and people, and also a duty to treat people with respect and dignity and integrity under virtues. So obviously, they cross over.
Right. Great, and I think what's helpful sometimes is when we build these teams and when we build the business, and we basically saying that with the introduction of AI, we have to take care of decision, we have to take care of ethics, and this is how we're gonna play that role of helping make those decisions. Okay, so then when it came to change, and I think this is another one for Christine. We're running out a bit of time, so I'll go through this thing. Is a lot of it's about how do we get the team to work with us? Okay, and Christine, I added some extra stuff here. I like this thing. This is actually in the DMBOK, where they talk about the difference between the innovator and the laggards. And when I was going through it, when we look at the simple area, this is just do as you are told. Right? We're not looking for rocket science. We're not looking for all of these different areas. We're saying that we understand when we see an effect, we understand the cause. So please deal with the cause. Let's not have too many debates. And I was a little bit embarrassed to say that probably the laggards would be doing great here. All right? They almost told and they understand how this whole thing works. So they don't have to jump to new technologies. They can operate in that area. And then we get the complicated, which is execute as advised. So remember we said these are the experts. The experts, we do the prediction, we look at the confirmatory, and then we say, okay, what does it mean to us, and can we move forward? And I believe these early majority people are areas that can work really well in this situation where they're saying, oh, okay, that looks interesting. What does this mean to us? But I need confirmation, right? So they won't jump on it until an expert confirms for them. Okay. And then we have the complex, which is find an answer. These are the innovators. These are the people that love the new challenge or new decisions and understanding. That's where our innovators operate. And then we've got the chaos or directed trial and error, meaning you get a decree. Now, please don't argue about it. Let's all get on the bus and let's get the things going. And this is the guy who's going to get excited about it. You don't want naysayers when a person's issued a decree, because you mean if you argue too much, you probably could find a hole in that person's decree. But that's not the issue here. The issue is let's save lives and let's get on with the job and doing it. We can adjust, but let's move along. So that's the sort of culture that of the type of people we're dealing with that I've suggested here go well in terms of the team culture. Okay, so this is basically a summary of all of what we've spoken about in terms of the organization. You've got to take care of it. You've got to look after your understand the CDO, get the right person in place, understand the decisions, understand whether the decision making is centralized or federated, know where your decisions are coming in, and deal with them slightly different, and choose your right leadership and, of course, your culture. Okay, so in summary, I put this together. So what is a world-class data team? Okay, the world-class data team is a team that answers business questions so that decisions can be made, action can be taken and monitored. And that sort of brings me to the end of my discussion. Any questions, guys? I have, if we look at this, we've had some questions in the lead up. These are the 4 questions that I have, but I noticed that Genevieve asked a question, and I was keen to just understand a little bit more. Genevieve, you said there are starkly different thinking styles sitting at the governance of decision making in my experience in government. So would you just help me explain a little bit on that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of cross collaboration, just even between cultures and structure. Those obviously come with their own sort of packaging, and the decision, at least the thinking styles, are very different. Ranging from everything from culture to generational differences, and to find the agility, across these different channels is, it's very interesting one, but I think it requires an agility that I can't even yet really quite conceptualize. But I do think that what Christine mentioned about how teams change, and in that we really need to now more than ever be more multidisciplinary and able to understand from as many different perspectives as possible and be as flexible as possible in order to make quality decisions, because we are at this stage where and especially increasingly so with COVID and the way that we're doing business globally, that these cultures and generational differences and everything that goes into thinking styles need to be better understood by most, in order for us to start getting really sort of sound quality decisions.
Yeah. So I'm in agreement with most of what you've said. The area that the area or the sort of thing that I bring in is the thing I really like about structuring my decisions and qualifying my decisions is we now start to get a better understanding of when is flexibility important and when is flexibility dangerous.
Yeah.
In terms of And I think sometimes we ignore that and we just treat all decisions in the same way. And then we get upset when people dictate, and we don't have the understanding of, we're in a chaos environment. You have no data that's really going to help you, and you need someone to step up and make the decision.
Absolutely. And would you say that this is the first time in that sort of our recent history as a people that we've been in a position that we are now to have to consider so many things and to be at a standpoint where we're able to actually reflect on decisions from the past and, you know, I mean, a decision audit, awesome. Like, would we have ever considered stuff? Is there a history where we have done sort of decision auditing in cultures, or is this something it's new? Is it something that we're starting to come to understand and very important?
It's and so the thing that led me to a lot of this, I almost read a paper about a year and a bit ago of McKinsey clarifying or classifying the top 500 companies and noticing that the strength of decision making was different across these top 500. And the ones that were really excelling had the ability and the agility to make good decisions promptly and well. And it led to this, and I'll just go back to that slide. It led to that slide where we talk about decision sophistication, where we have strong, high levels of agreement and not so much the agree and disagree. And so they're starting to recognize the effectiveness of decision making and the performance of the business. So that's what led me to start looking at and paying attention to this decision life cycle. And the other thing that struck me was that's what the business understand. They can give, they know the decisions that they need to make. We have to sit and help them match the data to the decision, but a lot of the times we actually not doing it. I had an example here of, and I'd like to go through that quickly in terms of what I see some of our challenges. Is this thing where we looking at data and engineering our data, but we're not linking it to the organizational decision models and the vision. So we got these degrees of separation because we don't fully understand the decisions we're making. So we're looking at data for purely interest's sake and what we can understand, but we don't know the decisions that they're going to answer and how we're going to measure our business.
Well, maybe that's where biomimicry could actually speak to a little bit in terms of the importance of the integration, of bringing that all the way back to, you know, exactly the strategy and the core values, and to make it really sound and useful and meaningful, and actually, you know, to be able to transcend those separation gaps.
Okay. That's great. I'll certainly look to talk to Esty. Are you aware of anybody that is applying the biomimicry?
Yeah. So what I can do is I can either mail you or even on LinkedIn share. There is a lady that heads Biomimicry SA. I think she's all over, but she does everything from workshops to business strategy consulting. And I think it is growing here, certainly globally, but her name is Claire Yanesh. So I can definitely make that link in LinkedIn if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? I think we're at the end there, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for everybody for their questions. And just something that came to mind, Howard, is we're obviously looking at building a world-class data team. And I was just thinking of, from a personal point of view, when you start to understand the different positions and the different dimensions to those things, and the Cynefin, it also gives a confidence to where you know yourself and you fit in better, and I don't know, it may just for some build that confidence to really, you know, step up, contribute, and also then make decisions in terms of where they're going in their career, where they rightfully fit in versus what's just going to be a challenge every day. And I'm not talking about we shouldn't take on challenges, but yeah, just finding that flow from an individual point of view as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been awesome again, and look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be here same time, same place, and have a great weekend going ahead.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate being allowed to lurk, participate, learn.
That's great. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys.